Hell is abuse in disguise, and it's time to say so. The hell illusion. Why eternal fire is a myth invented to control minds. For centuries, religious institutions have trafficked in fear, peddling a vivid and horrifying image of hell, an eternal inferno for those who doubt, question, or fail to conform. But when you strip away the myth and examine what fire actually is, the entire concept of hell collapses under the weight of basic physics and reason. Fire is not some spiritual punishment system awaiting the disobedient. It's a physical process governed by the unbreakable laws of chemistry. To believe otherwise is to confuse metaphor with mechanism, myth with matter. This essay argues that hell, as traditionally imagined, a place of literal burning torment, is a scientific impossibility. Moreover, the psychological need to believe in such a place often stems not from truth but from trauma. Many religious people are like internet trolls, damaged by early indoctrination, now committed to perpetuating that damage. They confuse punishment with virtue and fear with morality. This is the anatomy of belief in hell, a cocktail of ignorance, fear, and inherited cruelty. The scientists on their side. Whenever their beliefs are challenged, religious apologists frequently retreat to a tired defense. Even famous scientists believed in God. Names like Galileo, Kepler, Newton, and Faraday are invoked like holy relics. But there's a glaring problem. None of these minds lived past the birth of modern science. They died before the quantum revolution, before the discovery of DNA, before the Hubble telescope, before radioactivity, before we even knew what an atom really was. To use Newton's Christianity as evidence for the truth of the Bible is like using medieval medical texts to validate leech therapy. These figures lived in an age when religion was not just socially mandated, it was politically enforced. Not believing in God wasn't just unpopular, it could cost you your job, your freedom, even your life. Would Kepler have endorsed the Genesis creation myth if he'd had access to the data from the Human Genome Project? Would Faraday still have believed in the resurrection if he understood redshift, stellar nucleosynthesis, and the age of the universe? We'll never know, but today's scientists do know these things, and the vast majority of them reject religious literalism outright. The myth of the believing scientist. To counter the growing secularism in academia, apologists often cite surveys claiming that many scientists believe in God. But what does that even mean? These surveys typically ask one vague question. Do you believe in God? That's it. No clarification. No follow-up. Does God mean a bearded man watching us masturbate from the clouds? A cosmic watchmaker who lit the fuse of the Big Bang and then left? A vague feeling of awe when looking up at the stars. If those same scientists were asked whether they believe in hell, a place where souls are tortured in fire forever for the crime of disbelief, the numbers would plummet. If they were asked if they believed in Adam and Eve, or that God cares about who we sleep with or what we eat during Ramadan, the yes responses would vanish. Religious defenders are banking on your ignorance, on your inability to tell the difference between a physicist who checks the God box out of cultural inertia and one who believes in virgin births, talking snakes, and infinite fire. So why don't scientists fear hell? Why aren't scientists scared of eternal fire? Why doesn't the threat of damnation work on them? It's not arrogance. It's not denial. It's because they understand what fire is. Religious texts say you will burn if you don't believe. They say it repeatedly. And it's not metaphorical. The Quran, the Bible, the Hadiths, these texts describe flames, skin being replaced to be burned again, gnashing teeth, unquenchable thirst. It's visceral on purpose. These are not allegories. These are attempts to frighten people into obedience. But fire doesn't work that way. Fire is not a spiritual force, it is chemistry. To someone who understands the mechanics of combustion, the threat of hell is laughable. What is fire, actually? Fire is a chemical reaction that requires three things: a fuel source, oxygen, and enough heat to reach the ignition point. When a material, say wood, is heated to around 300 degrees Fahrenheit, it begins to release gases. At around 500 degrees Fahrenheit, those gases combust with oxygen, releasing energy in the form of light and heat. This process is a temporary liberation of atoms. Molecules jiggle apart and recombine in a frenzy of subatomic negotiation, governed by electromagnetism. Photons are emitted as atoms release excess energy. That's the light you see. The heat you feel is simply atoms moving faster and faster, colliding with the atoms in your skin, overwhelming your nervous system. There's nothing mystical about it. Fire is not some eternal force, it is a fragile event, a fleeting chemical spasm that cannot occur without matter, without oxygen, without the laws of thermodynamics. In other words, no atoms, no fire. Why fire can't exist in the afterlife? Every single property of fire depends on physical reality. No carbon, no combustion. No oxygen, no flame. No atoms, no light. If you die and go to a place without your physical body, without carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, electrons, then there's nothing to burn. No nerves to transmit pain. No skin to blister. No photons to illuminate. Fire without fuel is like water without hydrogen and oxygen. So what do religious people say when confronted with this? They pivot. They say the fire in hell is not like real fire. It's magic fire. It burns without burning. It torments without atoms. It's immune to physics. But if it doesn't operate under any physical laws, then it's not fire. It's just a made-up horror story. It's like saying there's gravity in heaven but it only pulls things you don't like. The psychological roots of hell. Why cling to something so obviously false? The answer lies in psychology, not theology. Belief in hell is a form of inherited trauma. People indoctrinated as children, especially through fear, are not easily deprogrammed. They were told they would burn. They were told their thoughts could betray them. That curiosity was sin. That sex was sin. That honesty was dangerous. And that doubting meant doom. And like internet trolls who've been bullied so long they become bullies themselves, many of these believers want others to suffer too. They want hell to be real, not because of justice, but because they were made to believe it was justice. It validates their pain. It makes their suffering mean something. This is how the cycle of cruelty persists. Religion as institutionalized gaslighting. Hell is the ultimate gaslight. It teaches people that being tortured forever is their fault. That questioning an invisible being deserves incineration. That love is conditional. That morality equals obedience. That truth is what you're told, not what you discover. And when science dismantles these myths, when it reveals fire to be nothing more than excited atoms and light-emitting electrons, the religious accuse scientists of arrogance, of pride, of denying the obvious. But it's not arrogance to reject threats that make no sense. It's not pride to say that fire requires fuel. It's not denial to notice that you can't burn forever if there's nothing left to burn. The psychological machinery behind hellfire belief. It's important to understand that belief in hell doesn't thrive in a vacuum. It's not just about scripture, it's about conditioning. From a young age, many people are taught to internalize punishment. If they lie, they might get spanked. If they disobey, they get grounded. If they question religion, they burn forever. It's a hierarchy of consequences designed not to nurture morality but to enforce compliance. Hell is the final boss of this system. It's the eternal punishment waiting at the end of every bad choice, every independent thought. It's not meant to make people good. It's meant to make them afraid. And what happens when a child grows up under a system of eternal fear? They the rebel, or they absorb that fear so deeply they begin to defend it. They normalize it. They tell others it's righteous. This is how trauma transforms into theology. Hell, in this sense, is not just a doctrine. It's a trauma response disguised as divine justice. The internet troll analogy. Look at the way trolls operate online. Many are not just trying to offend, they're trying to replicate the pain they carry. They insult, shame, and bully because they were insulted, shamed, and bullied. It's cyclical abuse masquerading as entertainment. Religious zealots can behave similarly. Someone raised in a rigid, punitive faith may come to believe that suffering is morally necessary, that punishment is love, that cruelty is truth. And instead of healing, they double down. They threaten others with the same nightmare that terrified them as children. That's why so many religious fanatics focus on hell. Not heaven. Not peace. Not community. Hell. Fire. Wrath. Fear. That's the hook. That's the manipulation tool. That's the trauma on repeat. The troll wants others to suffer because they did. The fanatic wants hell to be real because otherwise they were abused for nothing. That's the tragic engine of belief. Hell is a system of control, not a spiritual truth. If you wanted to design a tool to control people, hell is about as efficient as it gets. It doesn't need to be proven, it just needs to be feared. It's an all-purpose obedience mechanism that's impossible to question without risk. Believe or burn. Submit or suffer. Conform or be damned. It's the spiritual equivalent of a totalitarian regime. Worse, it makes the victim complicit. People don't just fear hell. They spread it. They pass it down to their children, their students, their communities. Not because they're cruel, but because they're afraid not to. This is how religion enforces generational trauma. Not with evidence. Not with logic. With fear. With manipulation. With promises of paradise and threats of fire. And fire, remember, needs fuel. Magic fire, magic thinking. When pressed, religious apologists often retreat to metaphors or magical thinking. The fire in hell isn't like real fire, they say. It doesn't need oxygen. It doesn't need atoms. It's spiritual fire. But if fire doesn't need fuel, then it's not fire. If it burns souls without nerves, it's not pain. If it lasts forever but consumes nothing, it's not combustion. It's fiction. This kind of thinking isn't just wrong. It's deliberately evasive. It protects the idea of hell from scrutiny by moving the goalposts. It avoids scientific explanation by hiding behind mystery. It's no different than a child saying the monster is invisible, but definitely real. Magic fire is a narrative convenience, not a metaphysical truth. It's a last-ditch effort to preserve a cruel doctrine when science renders it obsolete. Hell belief has real-world consequences. You might think hell is just a story. That belief in hell doesn't really hurt anyone. But that's false. The consequences are measurable and widespread. Mental health: millions of people suffer from religious trauma, anxiety disorders, and depression stemming from fear of hell. It's especially severe among those raised in fundamentalist homes where hell is taught as fact. Moral confusion: teaching children that morality is about obedience to divine authority rather than empathy, compassion, or reason leads to warped ethical frameworks. It makes them vulnerable to manipulation and authoritarianism. Social division: hell belief fosters tribalism. If non-believers deserve eternal torture, then dialogue, empathy, and coexistence become irrelevant. The result is a fractured society unable to agree on basic human rights. Sexual repression: much of hell's imagined fuel is sexual sin. Who you love, what you fantasize about, what body parts you touch. Entire generations have been taught to associate pleasure with punishment. The psychological cost is enormous. Hell is not harmless. It is not abstract. It is not a cultural artifact that's outgrown its danger. It still wounds. It still divides. It still controls. The escape route: understanding reality. The most powerful antidote to hell is understanding. Not just rejecting doctrine, but replacing it with knowledge. When you understand combustion, you no longer fear eternal fire. When you understand psychology, you see that belief in hell often reflects pain, not truth. When you understand physics, you realize that there's no mechanism, no framework, in which hell could possibly exist. And when you understand that, you're free. Not because you've chosen a new belief, but because you've stepped out of the manipulation machine. Because you've realized that truth doesn't threaten, doesn't punish, doesn't torment. Hell is not part of any honest worldview. It is not a mystery. It is not beyond reason. It is a relic. A fossilized fear. A tool once used to keep populations docile and afraid. Now, it's time to outgrow it. Learning to laugh at the threat. Imagine someone tells you that you'll be eaten by invisible dragons if you read the wrong books. You'd laugh. Now imagine they spend their entire life building a culture, a hierarchy, and a morality around the threat of those dragons. You'd be horrified. That's what hell is. It's a bad story with deadly consequences. But like all bad stories, once you understand its mechanics, once you see the wires, it loses its power. Hell requires magic fire. Fire that burns without fuel. Pain without nerves. Punishment without reason. It demands belief in contradiction, in impossibility, in cruelty as divine justice. You don't need to argue with it. Just understand it. Understand fire. Understand psychology. Understand how myths are made, and why they persist. That alone breaks the spell. Knowledge is not arrogance, it's defense. Religious defenders call this arrogance. They say scientists are too proud to believe. That atheists are in denial. That skeptics are just afraid to admit the truth. But it's not arrogance to understand how light works. It's not denial to know that oxygen is necessary for combustion. It's not pride to notice that eternal torture is morally bankrupt and physically impossible. It's defense. Against manipulation. Against inherited fear. Against the normalization of abuse disguised as belief. You don't need a PhD to see through hell. Just curiosity. Just critical thinking. Just the courage to call nonsense what it is, even when it wears a sacred robe. Conclusion: learn and be free. Religion survives because most kids believe in magic, and all adults were once kids. Hell survives because most people were taught not to question it before they could understand it. But you can understand it now. You can know what fire is. You can know how belief works. You can know how trauma replicates itself through doctrine. And you can walk away from it. The fire they threatened you with isn't real. The punishment they warned you about isn't justice. The fear they gave you isn't truth. It's just noise. Ancient noise. Psychological hand-me-downs. So take back your mind. Learn and be free. You've only got one life, and it isn't waiting for you in a pit of fire. It's happening now. Make it yours.